Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we sift through sources you send us and pull out the really key insights. Today, we're tackling a couple of pretty significant books, Unrestricted Warfare, Beyond Traditional Combat, and its follow-up, Principles and Practice.
Right, both by Cao Yang and Wang Changsui.
Exactly. And you might know the English version with that pretty stark subtitle, China's Master Plan to Destroy America.
Yeah, that subtitle definitely gets attention. But what's really inside the core argument, that's what we want to unpack for you.
Right.
They basically argue that war itself, the whole concept, has changed. Fundamentally.
Changed how?
Well, they're saying it's not just about military force anymore. It's about using all means. Armed, non-armed, military, non-military, lethal, non-lethal. Anything to make your opponent give in.
Anything.
Anything. And the kicker is this underlying idea. There are no rules with nothing forbidden.
Okay, wow. That's a lot. Now, for you listening, we know that sounds maybe overwhelming. Complex stuff.
It is.
But that's what we do here. We're going to guide you through it, focus on the really surprising, crucial bits without getting bogged down.
Yeah, cut through the noise.
So let's start with that fundamental shift. What's the old view versus this new definition they're proposing?
Okay, so traditionally, war was pretty much defined by, armies, fighting armies, boots on the ground, ships at sea, planes in the air.
The classic picture.
Exactly. But unrestricted warfare offers this new definition. They say it's, and this is their quote, using all means, including armed force or non-armed force, military or non-military, and lethal and non-lethal means to compel the enemy to accept one's interests.
So it's way broader. It's not just about breaking things and defeating armies anymore.
Precisely. It's about achieving your goals, period. And they stress this isn't just like a new tactic. It's a change in the principles of war, a whole new game.
Okay. And they talk about needing an ideological revolution for this. What's that about?
That's key. They say unrestricted warfare is, first of all, a way of thinking and only afterwards a method.
A way of thinking?
Yeah. This ideological revolution means throwing out the old rule book, thinking beyond limits, beyond boundaries. They actually criticize traditional Western military thinking for being too narrow.
Narrow how? Focus only on military threats.
Kind of, yeah. Focused on specific enemies, specific types of fighting. They argue that leaves you open to attacks from completely unexpected directions, using methods you haven't even considered war before.
So you need this sort of uninhibited thinking, they call it.
Exactly. Uninhibited thought. That's how you leverage new tech, new societal factors, everything, as potential tools.
Which leads right into this idea of the omnipresent battlefield. That sounds, well, everywhere.
It is meant to. They literally ask, how did the concept of an omnipresent battlefield require new methods for national defense?
Right, because if the battle can be anywhere,
then defense has to be everywhere, too.
Yeah.
Not just borders. Think cyberspace, financial markets, media narratives. These become the main battlegrounds.
So social spaces, tech spaces.
Which changes the role of, well, everyone. Civilians, infrastructure. They ask another big question. If any sphere can become a battlefield, how does this change the role of civilians and civilian infrastructure in conflict?
They become targets, or even weapons themselves.
Potentially both. It blurs all those lines.
Okay, so if the battlefield is everywhere, what about weapons? Does that definition change too?
Massively. They make this distinction. New concept weapons versus a new concept of weapons.
Okay, what's the difference?
New concept weapons are still sort of recognizable as weapons, just more advanced or unconventional. Precision bombs, biotech, nanotech weapons. They even mention things like man-made earthquakes or weather disasters, subsonic waves, new chemical agents.
Wow. Still sounds pretty military, though, killing and destroying.
Right. The goal is still usually physical destruction, and it's tied to military stuff. But then there's a new concept of weapons.
And that's the big leap.
That's the really radical part. It means basically anything can be a weapon. Anything that helps mankind can also harm him. Their phrase is, nothing in the world today cannot become a weapon.
Okay, examples.
They give things like crashing a stock market on purpose,
No.
a massive computer virus, spreading rumors or scandals to wreck an exchange rate or take down a leader.
So it's about the effect, not the object itself. If it achieves the goal, it's a weapon.
You got it. And they argue this new concept is what really drives things now. It's not just about having the fanciest tech. It's about how you think about using everything as a potential weapon.
This paints a picture of conflict that's just intertwined with everything. Which
Yeah.
brings us to these super combinations they talk about. What are those?
Right, the super ideas. It's about combining things across different levels or categories. Three main types.
Okay, first one.
Supranational combinations. This means mixing national power, international bodies, think the UN, maybe the World Bank, and non-state actors.
Non-state, like who?
Big financiers like Soros, multinational corporations, credit rating agencies, central banks, groups with influence beyond any single country's military, using them together to pressure a target.
That sounds incredibly complex to manage. All those different interests.
It is, and they actually pose that question. What are the challenges of coordinating supranational combinations involving diverse entities with potentially conflicting interests? It's a huge coordination problem.
Okay, what's the second type?
Superdomain combinations. This is about mixing the different arenas of conflict: military, political, economic, cultural, tech, diplomatic.
So not keeping them separate.
Exactly. Treating any of those domains as potentially the main battlefield. Maybe today it's an economic fight, tomorrow it's cyber, the day after it's diplomacy backed by military threats, breaking through those Mensa silos.
So you pick the domain where you have the advantage, essentially.
Right. Be fluid.
Right.
Then there's super means combinations. This one's maybe the most all-encompassing. It's combining all the tools available. Military, non-military, everything we've talked about. They even float ideas like targeted assassinations of financiers or using lobbying as a weapon.
Really pushing boundaries there.
Definitely. The principle is effectiveness. What works? They say the best means is the one that achieves the objective, and here's the controversial part. Regardless of category or morality.
Whoa. Okay, that raises huge ethical flags. International law, norms.
Exactly. And they know it. They ask, if the best means is simply the one that achieves the objective, how does this impact international law or norms of conflict? It's a direct challenge to the whole system.
We've got actors, domains, means.
Yeah.
There's one more, right? Super tier combinations.
Yes. This one messes with the traditional layers of war. Tactical, operational, strategic. Usually you think of them building on each other.
Like small battles add up to a campaign which achieves a strategic goal.
Right. Super tier means you can connect those levels differently. Link up and assemble them at will, they say.
Can you give an example?
Think about, say, a single hacker attack that's tactical, right?
Yeah.
But maybe it takes down a nation's power grid. That's a massive strategic effect, achieved directly from a tactical action. Skipping the middle steps.
Like interchangeable parts you can snap together in new ways.
That's a good way to put it. They talk about warfare having interchangeable parts.
Okay, these concepts are mind-bending. But the sources, especially the English translation, they give concrete examples too, right? Things related to China and the U.S.
They do. The PLA authors Kiao and Wang, they actually lay out potential economic tactics China could use against the U.S. Currency games, market barriers, dumping products, propaganda, even proxy wars.
And they suggest this might be happening already.
They hint at it, yeah. They also point to other things as examples of this broader warfare, what they call semi-warfare, quasi-warfare, and sub-warfare.
Like what?
George Soros's currency plays in Asia back in the day, bin Laden's embassy attacks, the Tokyo subway gas attack by Om Shinrikyo, even that Morris worm that caused chaos online decades ago.
So actions that aren't declared wars, but have warlike impacts.
Exactly. Destructive potential comparable to war.
What about technology's role in all this?
They have a complex view. They see tech becoming almost dazzling and uncontrollable. They even worry about a benighted technological age where we become slaves to our tech.
A bit dystopian.
A bit. But they also say the integrated use of technology is vital for progress. But here's a key point. They argue these new concepts of weapons don't always need brand new tech.
Oh, what do they need then?
Lucid and incisive thinking. Different way of thinking. And they kind of jab at the U.S. here, suggesting that America's focus on technology might actually be a weakness, blinding it to these conceptual shifts.
Interesting critique. Any other examples that stood out?
Well, they talk about nuclear weapons, ultra-lethal weapons. They suggest the balance of terror paradoxically put the brakes on making even more lethal weapons.
So it pushed warfare in other directions.
Kind of, yeah. Towards maybe kinder weapons, relatively speaking. Precision strikes, non-lethal options. They see that as a turning point. They mention Russia taking out the Chechen leader Dudayev with a missile homing in on his satellite phone signal.
Wow. Pinpoint accuracy with strategic results.
Exactly. A perfect example of blending tech and a specific goal.
And information warfare, how do they define that?
They see it much more broadly than just cyber attacks. For them, information warfare is using information in any way to achieve national goals. It goes way beyond just military systems. Propaganda, perception management, data manipulation.
So broader than just hacking.
Much broader. They also talk a lot about non-state groups, extremist groups, terrorists.
Real Al-Qaeda, Al-Shinrikyo.
Yes, they see these groups, driven by ideology, as a major source of modern conflict. And a big challenge because these groups don't follow the rules that nations are bound by.
And they could use high-tech means, too.
That's the fear. They contrast old-school terror with a potential new terror war using advanced tech, maybe even superweapons. They mentioned Shinrikyo again and hypothetical groups targeting computer networks.
It really hammers home that point about blurred lines.
Totally. Non-military actions can be just as effective or more so than fighting. It leads them to rethink Clausewitz. War is politics with bloodshed. Maybe it's just politics by other means.
They mention alliances, too.
Briefly, yeah. They point to the Gulf War coalition as an overnight alliance, temporary, based on shared interest, not old-style fixed treaties, another sign of fluidity.
What about the U.S. military itself? Did they analyze that?
They did. They talked about the U.S. shift after the Gulf War towards omnidimensional combat, land, sea, air, space, cyber, the whole air tasking order concept, integrating everything.
But they also critique the U.S.
A little. They note how effective helicopters were in the Gulf War, suggesting a move towards winning land battles from the air. But they imply the U.S. maybe remained too focused on traditional tanks.
It's interesting tactical observation. And how did they see the U.S. using these super concepts?
They point to U.S. economic policy as a form of supranational combination.
Right.
Things like blocking an Asian monetary fund or attaching strings to IMF loans, using international institutions and economic leverage.
And against specific countries.
They use Iraq as an example. Military threats, plus economic blockade, plus weapons inspections, a super means and super domain approach.
And super tier.
Bin Laden is their example again. Tactical attacks, strategic shockwaves, or a single hacker causing national-level disruption, connecting the small action to the big consequence.
So ultimately, it all comes back to the mindset.
That's what they keep stressing. This beyond limits combined war is, above all, a way of thinking differently about conflict. So wrapping up this deep dive, it's pretty clear unrestricted warfare paints a picture of modern conflict that's, well, messy, complex, evolving.
Definitely not the old model. It pushes way beyond just military action. It demands we rethink what threats look like and what tools can be used to achieve goals.
And that core idea, right, the blurring lines, the nothing is forbidden principle, that's a massive challenge to security thinking, to international law, everything.
Which leaves a big thought for you listening to this. If you accept this idea of an omnipresent battlefield, this unrestricted warfare, how does that change how you see world events?
Yeah. What does it mean for the future? For us as individuals, for our societies, for governments, when conflict can pop up anywhere, in any form?
Some really fundamental questions to chew on there. We hope this deep dive gave you some valuable perspective. Thanks for joining us.